Hi, Charlotte. It's really fantastic to see you again. As an expert on leadership, you've been working in the world of leadership and what works and what doesn't work in terms of organizations, in terms of systems, in terms of situations. What do you think of the leaders that we have right now?
Thank you, because I've been really looking forward to speaking to you as well. It's really an honour. I think leadership is, for me, it's about courage. It's about stepping into the future and inviting others to join you there. Increasingly, leadership has become about helping people navigate real uncertainty and complexity. We're going to enter a period of real ambiguity, and I think it's really challenging to lead people through that. I think purpose really matters. That then pushes you to make decisions that might not always be the easy one, but the right thing to do. I think the moral case is as important as the business case. And I think accountability is also key. Clearly, communication has been critical. And that needs to be values driven. It needs to be clear, not confusing. I think a confused population is very unhelpful if you're trying to contain a pandemic. We obviously had this protracted Brexit negotiation, and I think there was real growing disdain for the political class. And then what's fascinating is fast forward only a few months, and we find ourselves with them in our living room every afternoon. And we have to be highly deferential to what it is they're telling us to do. Letting science play a key role in this, I think, has been hugely important. And I think, for example, for the climate crisis, it would be good if we saw the same discipline. Where I've seen brilliant leadership, I mean, it's almost too obvious to say it, but clearly Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, she's a brilliant communicator. She acted decisively and swiftly. But I think the key actually is empathy. I think it's how empathetic she is and how open she is with that empathy. It's authentic. I think she does that incredibly powerfully. Yes. The unprecedented nature, scale and pace of this meant that we had to become creative like never before. We all used to talk about agility, we used to talk about creativity, but I think we had to innovate overnight. The decision that it was time to get the street homeless into shelter. Why did it take this for us to make that decision? Everyone should have, there's enough shelter. We're just not creative enough about how we share it out. All these issues we've tried to look at for years and years and years. And it's not been easy. And of course, as I said, it's uneven and it's complex. I understand all of that. But I don't think I'll be taking no for an answer again. We talk about leading by example with leaders. And haven't we been shocked at the indiscretions when someone who has set a policy that has a really extreme impact on our free movement has then not followed their own rules? It's been shocking. It puts into such sharp focus how important it is that a leader leads by example, because the impact and consequences of those, small decisions taken by individuals, I think, are truly profound. I think good leaders have to be prepared to course correct. And I just don't know how good governments have been at that, saying, we didn't get that right. Yeah. We think we need to change the approach. And so swift course correction, I think, is a really key attribute of effective leadership.
It would have been nice, wouldn't it, from time to time to have heard someone say, we didn't know, we did our best, we got it wrong, let's do this instead.
I think the future is hugely uncertain. I think it's highly ambiguous. I think if we make decisions that aren't sensible, it's potentially dangerous. We've had to confront our own mortality and the mortality of everyone we love and cherish. It asks a lot of people, right? So we really need to respect the leaders that are asking that of us, I think, because the stakes are so very high.
We're still focused, or our leaders are still focused on the how. This is what you need to do. When have we ever heard someone say, I made a mistake, I got ill as a result? All of that stuff that really brings the consequences home. I don't think they've filled it with enough energy for us to stop going to Southend-on-Sea and sitting on a beach with 60 other people having picnics.
I think vulnerability is something lots of leaders are still not good at because they perceive it as a sign of weakness. So we don't tend to see it. How deep-seated those fears and concerns must be. In some ways, there's been so many practical things we have to do that I think how profound this situation actually is sometimes gets lost. When you watch the media at the beginning, particularly if you watched it around the clock, there wasn't even a future. I don't think they even made it sound like there was a future after this. I think it was so dark and overwhelming. Leaders must offer hope, and we have to talk about a future for sure, without, in any way, undermining the gravity of the situation today. But I feel like these are really big decisions people are taking. So leaders, they have to get the communication right. They have to be able to mobilize the whole population. We have to feel that sense of shared vulnerability, that collective conscience. We're all rallying against this terrible threat, but equally we could be rallying against towards a better future. We've got to turn this into a huge opportunity somehow.
And do you think that, bearing in mind your leadership development over the years, your ideas of what makes that work have changed? Or has this crisis endorsed those qualities for you?
I think all the things we always understood to be the good hallmarks of leadership still matter. You know, things like grit and resilience, how to be calm when facing, huge pressure, things like leading and pacing. Things like, transparency, in the same way the government now shows us a graph and talks just about figures on a daily basis. That's a transparency that was inconceivable 2 months ago, that the government would be declaring to you every day the data that was driving their decisions and be accountable to you every single day about that is extraordinary, actually. But I think that accountability, getting in the trenches has been really key. All the things that we all knew had to happen, like we had to be more agile, we had to digitally transform, we had to be more vulnerable, we had to lead sustainably, we had to lead inclusively. They're all just, frankly, in sharper focus than ever. Yeah. There was already uncertainty and complexity, and that's far greater today than it was 2 or 3 months ago. So how do leaders help us navigate that? It's sometimes portrayed as you've got these two options. You can have economic growth, or you can have dolphins in the canal in Venice. And we've got to move away from that, because the truth is we need a transition to a low carbon economy, and it needs to be a just transition. And in terms of leading inclusively, you might be focusing, linked to your gender pay gap reporting on gender. You might be focusing on ethnicity. There's a range of things you might be focusing on. But if you think about an individual's circumstances today, how much they'll shift over time, how accentuated they've become through this crisis. So how are you picking up, all the various vulnerabilities people may have, some which are less easy to get purchase on? How are you thinking about shifting carer responsibilities? What about the recently bereaved? We don't tend to have such a focus on that, but actually if you're going through this level of grief as a nation, that's such a key part of who someone is. People tend to have a policy, but they don't tend to have a very active strategy in place. What it means to be inclusive is really shifted. People's contexts are radically altered, and I think they'll change day to day. Wellbeing has got to be a daily conversation in the workplace. Yes, there's a wellbeing strategy, but you need to be discussing every dimension of wellbeing with your people every day, because it's paramount at the moment. It's going to be a really testing time. We've got to invest more in leaders. So how do you just make someone who's a leader suddenly brilliant at leading through uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity? Like, how do you skill someone for that?
But that was their job in the first place, wasn't it? It was the job in the first place. So this situation has just created sharp focus around what is required of a leader. I can just tell how much thinking you've done around all of this. And in a way, that's good for us too, that the people who are the thinkers, the movers, the shakers, the developers of others, have now had a pocket of time, a little piece of space to observe and consider and draw some new conclusions. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Honestly, for someone who's worked with leaders for all the years that you have, with the ideas that you have, to be able to reflect against that backdrop and give us some ideas has been just so important.
Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you.